Lend your ear, open your mind, you're gonna learn a lot about your past and yourself you didn't know before. The past affects your future. We have all inherited lies of those who are ruling over us. It is them who told their version of history. Meet the white supremacists who gave all of us their version of history. From the evolution out of Africa, they have also taught and made up African American studies that is taught in schools and universities throughout the world. And as the years rolled by, more of them joined their efforts, such as Walter Plecker. And together, they all killed our identity on paper and said that we came from Africa on ships, which there are no ships or artifacts for that matter to prove that we were brought across the Atlantic Ocean over to America. The truth is that so-called black people, 9-ether beings, were everywhere. We inhabited every square inch of this planet prior to the Caucasoids invading and ruling over us. How can our enemies, white supremacists, give us our history accurately? I hate to be the bearer of what some might consider to be bad news, but so-called African Americans are not African at all. In fact, we were named African Americans in the 1980s. Prior to that, we were known as Indians, savages, colored, Afro-American, Black, Negro, African American finally in the 1980s. This was done through paper genocide. These people killed our identity on paper.
The Plecker era was truly one of the darkest times for Native people. But I think it's critical for us to think about what was the genesis of the ideology that Plecker was a proponent of. And it's really the Eugenics movement. The Eugenics movement was a pseudo-scientific movement. And we say pseudo-scientific today because we find that the science that they were proposing is not what we today would honor as scientific in any way. The Eugenics movement has a direct link to the descendants of Charles Darwin. They somehow made the leap to these notions about racial purity. What is best for each race is racial purity. Plecker and his friends convinced the Virginia legislature to adopt very restrictive legislation in 1924. It's called the Racial Integrity Act. With this legislation, it was decreed that there were only two possible categories. One is white, which means a person, you check that you're white if you have white ancestry, Caucasian ancestry, and absolutely nothing else. The other category is everybody else, and that's colored. So this was very hard on Virginia's indigenous community because, in a sense, it wipes away their identity on paper. Their ability to describe themselves as Indian was not possible.
A lot of you don't realize that during the time they claimed we were enslaved, we actually had thriving communities throughout the Americas. Yes. In fact, they bombed a lot of our homes and stole our land, and our towns were flooded and things of that nature around the 1800s all the way through the 1900s. Also, the Trail of Tears happened when they dispossessed us of our land and they sent us to Oklahoma and other places. And if we didn't go, they would call us Negroes instead of Indians, as we were called prior to. So if we were enslaved during that time, how is all this going on at the same time as well? See, our history is alive. In 1831 in Portsmouth, Ohio, many of the melanated residents were expelled under Ohio's discriminatory black laws. During 1804 and 1807, when we were said to be enslaved, black laws were created by Caucasians, which discouraged melanated people's migration to Ohio. Slavery was not permitted in the 1803 Constitution. In the 1870s through the 1940s in Wyandotte, Michigan, many melanated people were expelled from Wyandotte on multiple occasions. For a detailed list of all of the towns and homes and areas that we were dispossessed from, and our neighborhoods were bombed and flooded and destroyed by the Anglo-Saxons, please take a look at my video entitled Melanated People Are Owed Millions. Again, I ask, how is it that we were enslaved when we actually had towns that were set up that Anglo-Saxons were stealing from us, from right up under our feet, kicked us out of our homes, stole our homes, stage massacres and riots and things, but yet we were enslaved, right? We were prisoners of war, not slaves. His story. How can the people who subjugate, who oppress you, give you your history and also give you salvation, give you a God? This video is going to detail how the slave trade was told in reverse from the Americas to Africa, not from Africa to America. Don't shoot the messenger with the message trying to clear up the lies that we've all been told. Go after those who told the lie. Listen now. It all starts with a Spaniard named Montejo who sails from Spain all the way to the Yucatan in order to take possession of it and colonize the people who were living there. As you can see, the Yucatan is clearly in the Americas. I blew it up so you can see it even closer. You can clearly see the United States above, Belize right below, and Cuba off to the right. My purpose for showing you the map and where all of this is located, what we're going to be discussing, is to prove to you that these people were nowhere near Africa. Prior to colonization by the Spaniards, the Indians got along fine. They lived in well-ordered communities where their priests were pretty much in the center of town. Everybody was taken care of just fine. And, there was just no need for them to have any sorts of weapons. All of that changed upon the arrival of the Spaniards from Europe, who was unaliving them, enslaving them, just doing all sorts of wicked things to them. And the Indians were now in fear of being taken into captivity. So a lot of them retreated into the forests in order to avoid captivity. I am going to come back and revisit this whole issue of the Indians over here in the Americas being afraid of being taken into captivity. A side note is that there was a split amongst the southern Indians and the northern Indians. The ones in the south from Mexico all the way down to the bottom of South America, they were idolatrous. They did not believe in circumcision, and they also did human sacrifice. The Indians in the north above Mexico, they called them the noble northerners because they were not into all that. This video is about the ones in the south, so we'll continue on with them. The Indians were idolatrous, so the Spaniards burned thousands of the Indians' idols. They burned their hieroglyphic scrolls, which they deemed as works of the devil designed by the evil one to delude the Indians and to prevent them from accepting Christianity, which they forced on the Indians. The Indians fiercely opposed being turned into Catholics. Christianized. They hated it so much. They fought it tooth and nail to the point where the Europeans, the Spaniards, they began to cut off their limbs to punish them. They unalived many of them, forcing them to accept their God, their religion, Christianity. In what has been named the Franciscan Order of the Yucatan, the Spaniards also burned remnants and traces of the Indians' history. My opinion is that this is an effort to distort the true identity of the Indians. So what do these Indians look like? What do they wear? Breeches. Anyone that knows anything about breeches, you know that this is written in the scriptures to the Israelites. They wore breeches, the Levitical priests to be exact. The Levitical priests were instructed by their God specifically to wear breeches when they performed rites, rituals, sacrifices, and things of that nature on behalf of the Israelite community. A description of the hair on their head and on their beards was that it was rough and coarse like hog's bristles. We all know who has hair like that. The Indian women of the Yucatan were called negresses by the Spaniards. They said that the Indian women were dark-skinned, that had much larger and better bodies than their women, with large behinds that they called haunches. It is abundantly clear from the notes of the Spaniards that the Indians of the Americas were so-called black people. They were never called Africans. They were called Indians, and they were called negresses. It is extremely important for you to note that it was the people over here in the Americas who were afraid that people were going to come and capture them for fear of being taken into captivity, not people in Africa. I also want you to keep in mind that in Africa, there are many different types of people over there. You don't have a bunch of Negroes. All of the so-called black people in Africa are not all Negroes. There are just some that are Negroes. If you go to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10, there is a breakdown of all three of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It tells you all of their descendants and ancestors. The Zondervan Dictionary points out that Noah's son Ham became the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes. This here is proof alone that Ham's descendants are the Hamites, who are also the Africans. It's really interesting how the colonizers and enslavers love to just lump us all into the same bunch. Oh, they're all the same. You know, but they can be Grecian, French, Russian, Ukrainian, from Turkey. They can all be different people and have different customs and cultures. We all have to be the exact same people. It's no different from there being different types of Asians. You have your Japanese, you have your Thai, you have your Chinese, you have your Korean, there's so Cambodian, there's so many different ones and everything. This is a European mapping system that indicates where the Negroes in Africa reside. It's called Negroland, and it is in West Africa where the Negroes are concentrated. Everywhere else in Africa are the Africans, the Hamites from Noah's son Ham. From the top of the Americas all the way down to the bottom of the Americas, where all of the so-called Negroes are at. For the mere fact alone that there are not any stories that are circulating in Africa about how their ancestors had to hide from the white man because he was coming to take them into captivity. It's very safe to say that since we experienced that over here in the Americas, the slave trade actually happened from here. People were actually taken into captivity from the Americas. And most Africans could care less about the transatlantic slave trade. Listen up.
How do Senegalese really feel about slavery and what happened? Because, there are a lot of very foul people involved in the slave trade. There was, of course, Europeans, Jews and whites were involved. But, Africans were involved in it as well. They were selling off their enemies.
We've kind of overcome the thought of slavery. We don't even think about it.
Only time you actually know your history. You can trace your family back 100 generations, whatever else. You still have real names.
I think it's also the art of just letting the past go.
There's also been no reparations.
Unfortunately, man, it's not like America is going to take the initiative to do it. Indians got reparations. The Jewish got reparations for Holocaust, and it wasn't even done in America. Italians got reparations. Japanese got reparations. It's to the point now where African Americans have to really understand they're not sorry. They don't care.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Are you still convinced that we are the same people? Don't the same people normally care about their own issues? Now what? Huh, Pan-Africans? Huh? All of y'all are caring so much about what's going over there in Africa and how they're being treated so badly, but true, most of them could care less about our plights and what's going on with us over here. And if there were slave ships, where are they at? I haven't seen any proof of them. Have you? Take a look at this.
One of the best documented accounts of the transatlantic slave trade. In 1860, slavery was still legal in Alabama, but importing new slaves was banned. Wealthy Mobile landowner Timothy Mayer made a bet he could pull off an illegal run to Africa. He paid Captain William Foster to sail to what was then the Kingdom of Dahomey, today Benin. He forced 110 captives onto the boat, then sailed back, sneaking into the Mobile River under the cover of night. Foster took notes about it all.
I then took my schooner and burned and sank it, says Captain Foster. Clotilda basically took a sharp turn and went up that way, and somewhere up there was burned and
So
sank.
then all the experts came back. It took them 13 months, but last week they verified that we had found Clotilda.
Child, I was born, but not yesterday.
The ship Bunch was looking for was discovered in the archives of Cape Town, South Africa. Anthropologist Steve Lukeman found an old investigation into a Portuguese ship that hit bad luck at the Cape of Good Hope. 200 slaves drowned in the wreck.
We have the captain's account, and he signed his name here 220 years ago.
In 2010, the wreck was discovered, found dozens of artifacts, but this may be the most revealing. X-rays show it's a shackle, similar to this, used to bind slaves.
The São José is a slave ship that starts in Lisbon, travels to Mozambique, picks up captive Africans to sell them into enslavement in Brazil. The ship goes down just off the coast of South Africa.
So there were allegedly hundreds of voyages from Africa to the Americas carrying slaves. However, there's nothing to show for it. There's no ships. There's just a board from a ship. There are some shackles. And then there's a book that a captain allegedly wrote in. And so none of the voyages were actually successful. I ask again, where are the slave ships to prove that slaves were taken from Africa and brought over to the Americas? Where are they? We have inherited lies. We have been betrayed by the American miseducation system.
I love the theme, American healing. Well, first let's think about something. Where did America come from? Has it always been America? Or was it just created to be America? Who are the real Americans? America keep changing and changing and changing. Let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look and roamed the southeast part of the United States freely. I love what the mayor said. We have to tell the truth. We cannot heal America till we fix the foundation. Can we start right there?
Do you know that there were indigenous black people in the Americas, and they were Moorish black people, and that the chopping of the cherry tree of George Washington was him officially cutting off their inheritance and their history from ever being remembered, and that he had written and said that in 200 years, if we remove the turbans from their heads, the sandals from their feet, and we make them think that they are just like any other black people, that they will forget their entire history and their inheritance and the fact that they are indigenous to the Americas.
The lion heads are in Sedona. The Olmec, the statue of the Olmec in Sedona, you guys. Sedona, Arizona. Singing birds. These are bird beings, you guys. Again, bird beings are in the rock. These are ancient temples in Sedona from ancient Atlantis. They try to say that Atlantis is a fable, is a myth. No, it is not. It predates Kemet. Queens and kings of Sedona. Atlantean queens and kings. These are the queens and kings of Atlantis, carved within the rocks in Sedona. When water wears on rocks, then the appearance of them disintegrates. Look at that face right there. We are here. We have been here. We didn't come from no daggone Africa.
An ancient Egyptian city is found in the Grand Canyon, along with a sphinx. Here are before and after photos of how it looked before it was destroyed by the Europeans.
Explorer G.E. Kincaid took a boat down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. The canyon was rich in minerals like gold, silver, and copper, and Kincaid wanted to see what he could find before the area was closed off for good. On the walls, he saw it was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. G.E. Kincaid now realized he was in a huge complex. He estimated that as many as 50,000 people could have lived here. The rooms were full of ancient artifacts. Then he came across another large room, a crypt. The crypt had shelf upon shelf and row upon row of mummies, dozens of them.
A pyramid and a sphinx were found 7 miles outside of Natchez, Mississippi by a construction crew. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the United States of America, and they profited from the sale of them. An Israeli archaeologist purchased 4 Dead Sea Scrolls that were for sale, listed in the Wall Street Journal, for $250,000 on behalf of the newly established State of Israel. Most of the $250,000 that he received for the sale of the Dead Sea Scrolls actually went to the Internal Revenue Service in the United States. Why? Because they said the bill of sale was drawn up incorrectly. So if the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in the United States, sold in the United States, and the United States profits from the sale of the Dead Sea Scrolls, does that not tell you ancient Israel is actually in the United States? And guess what language those scrolls are written in? That's right, ancient Paleo-Hebrew. The Dead Sea Scrolls include fragments from every book of the Old Testament except for the book of Esther. You should be getting chills right about now, and alarm bells should be going off. You are now looking at an Old Testament map of ancient America with Egypt, the Egyptian Sea, Israel, Assyria, Babylon, and the Great Sea. I now present to you evidence that the slave trade happened in reverse. People were taken from the Americas into Europe and Africa. We all know the story about how Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. He headed straight to the Caribbean, where he went to places like Trinidad, Cuba, South America, and Hispaniola. But did you know that Christopher Columbus had established trade in sex slaves on Hispaniola, with victims as young as 9 years old? These are the colonizers' descriptions of what the native people look like from Canada all the way down to South America. It tells you that they're copper colored, that some of them are dark skinned. It says some are swarthy complexions, but we come in many different shades. Columbus sent 4 ships back to Europe loaded to capacity with 550 natives that were auctioned off at Mediterranean markets. He did several journeys. Columbus and his other European buddies raped, abducted, traded, and sold for sex indigenous women all over the Caribbean and South America. Christopher Columbus is responsible for forcing thousands of natives all over the Caribbean islands and South America into sex labor, as well as seizing, selling, and exporting native women and children to their fate as sex slaves. The result is a centuries-long process of genocide and colonization of indigenous people, including the enslavement of 2.5 to 5 million indigenous people, death of indigenous people by disease, murder, dismemberment, rape, land theft, destruction of animals and natural resources, starvation, removal, concentration camps, and forced religious conversions. Okay. So people who do such wicked things, how can they give you God? We know that Christopher Columbus did not go to North America, but other Europeans came and they did the exact same thing that Christopher Columbus did. All of these horrific things that the Europeans did to us indigenous people, it actually reduced the population by 90%. In addition to that, there were treaties that were made between our indigenous ancestors and the Europeans, which they broke every last one of them. There were actually peace treaties. An international law called the Doctrine of Discovery enabled Christopher Columbus to make 3 expeditions to conquer non-Christian people. Now, did you hear me? We were not Christians. The Doctrine of Discovery gave him the permission to come and Christianize us, turn us into Christians, and to export us everywhere, enslave us, and do all of the wicked things that these Christians did to our people. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal decree that indicated more explicitly that only Christian rulers could legitimately claim land ownership in our lands. This is how they acquired our land for free. According to Columbus's notes, men seized about 5 women each as their concubines, while others marauded across the island in search of villages with gold. So they basically stripped us of all of our wealth, our homes, our land, and everything else of value that we had. And this is how they ended up becoming rich. It's a true story of Robin Hood, because they robbed all of our hoods. This is how they got their wealth. For women and children being valued 50 to 60% more than the men because of breeding purposes. This is how they ended up whiting out South America. Now these people are Hispanics. Hispanics, mestizos, are the end result of them raping our women and using them for breeding purposes. Do you realize that this Indian slavery that our ancestors went through was the antecedent to the sex trafficking that goes on today? The number of slaves in Europe during the period from 1500 to 1800 estimated to be just about over 2.5 million. Now, earlier, I mentioned that there were from 2.5 to 5 million. The rest of them were dumped in Africa. This is why there are Negroes in Africa today. I showed you that the Negroes are from the Americas. This is where the Negroes are at. This is where they are from. So how they ended up over in Africa is because this slave trade was actually told in reverse. They were taken from here, the Americas, up through Europe and down into Africa. And by the way, happy Columbus Day. So why would anyone go through such great lengths to ruin a people as they have us? Paper genocide, changing our identity multiple times over and over, making the whole entire world to hate us, making us an object of horror, as it states in the book of Deuteronomy. Those of you who do not believe in the scriptures, please stay with non-believers. I want you to understand, I'm not a part of any religious group, movement, or anything of that sort. But history is history, and I found that the Old Testament is true history. Overstand, this is the reason why they keep Christians out of the Old Testament completely. They say that it has been done away with, it's archaic, and what they have now, which is the New Testament, has replaced the Old Testament. And that's not true. They're trying to keep you out of it because it's your history. The New Testament, that's their version of the Bible. That's what they use to colonize us. That's what they use to Christianize us. I understand that. But the Old Testament is actually our true story. We are the people who built Noah's Ark. I'm about to prove that to you right now.
But E. Callaway is content, for he has found the Garden of Eden. And I can prove that this is paradise. And the Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. This sacred spot, contends Callaway, is here to the east of the Apalachicola River in the unspoiled country of the Florida Panhandle. Here grow trees pleasant to the sight, including gopher trees, the long-needled torreya which Noah used to build the ark. Well, Mr. Callaway, you say that this is the Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden, east and west, is not over 10 miles wide, paralleling the river from Chattahoochee down to Bristol. But you're right in the center of it here at Torreya State Park, north and south, between Chattahoochee and Bristol. This is the Pison River, which is mentioned in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, when it says, a river went out of Eden to water the garden and parted and became into 4 heads. The Bible names 28 trees. The best authority on earth have identified 27 of them here, and many, many more, including the gopherwood tree. The Bible names those 4 river heads as the Pison, the Gihon, or Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates. The first one was the Pison. The Bible says that is it that compasseth the land of Havilah, which was North Florida, before the flood, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is G-O-O-D. The Bible used that adjective to describe the North Florida gold to further tie down the exact location of the Garden of Eden. The next verse says there's also bdellium there, which is nothing but rosin out of pine trees that God instructed Noah to pitch the ark out of, and onyx stone, which is marble. And North Georgia, right where this great river has its source, is one of the largest marble areas in the world. The Tate Marble Quarry and Company there at Tate, Georgia, is one of the largest. So the natural monuments definitely mentioned and described in the Bible as being related to the Garden of Eden are here, and they are not anywhere else on this earth. When the idea or the notion or the belief that the Garden of Eden was somewhere else or over in Europe or in Africa or someplace over there, the Western Hemisphere was unknown. They did not know that the continent existed west of the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, they couldn't search this continent along with the others to find the River of 4 Heads and these other great natural monuments which the Bible said was related to the Garden of Eden.
He clearly stated that the Garden of Eden is not in Africa or the fake Middle East that they made up to throw you off.
Callaway points with pride to the official map of the U.S. engineers at Chattahoochee, which shows what Callaway says is the only four-head river system in the world. That is a system described in the Bible, where in Genesis, the river flowing out of Eden, which waters the garden, parts and becomes into four heads. First there is the Gihon, now known as the Flint River, which flows towards the land of Ethiopia. Then the Euphrates, the Spring Creek River, whose name was transferred to the Middle East after the flood. The Hiddekel River is Fish Pond Creek River, which borders the land of ancient Assyria. And finally, the last of the four rivers, the wide and lovely Paisan, the Chattahoochee, today a river of trade and commerce. The Apalachicola seems an unlikely name for the river flowing through Eden, but here, according to Callaway, is the heart of the garden. This peaceful river is the life source of the lush vegetation of the original habitat of the first man and woman. According to Callaway, the names of these rivers and the land surrounding them were transferred to the other side of the world when, after floating in the ark for 40 days and 40 nights, Noah and his family landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey. The legend of the Bountiful Garden, too, was transferred to the Middle East, where archaeologists have searched in vain for a four-head river system, such as described in the Bible.
So I have shown y'all this book before, the Yucatan Before and After the Conquest. It was written by Friar Diego de Landa. He was actually there with the Israelites, the Indians, the people that they call the Aztecs, the Chiapas. Like there's so many different tribes because there are 12 tribes after all of Israel. So all of them were different tribes. Let's take a look inside. This book is basically talking about those in the South, from Mexico all the way down to South America. They were conquered, but this was the Yucatan where it actually took place. These are the same people that talked about the locusts. We know that about from Pharaoh, the famines. They talked about the flood of Noah. And guess what else they talked about? How they wandered in the wilderness of the Yucatan for 40 years. Of the Yucatan. Okay? Not Africa. The Yucatan, which is in Mexico. Now take a look at the red markings that I have at the top. It says the Indians relate that there came into Yucatan from the south tribes with their chiefs, which are the Levitical priests. That's their chiefs. Okay? And they came from Chiapa. Now, these people, they came from the South, like South America, up to the Yucatan. And that's exactly what's going on right here. So as you can see where I have it underlined, how it was a custom for them to take care of their crippled and their blind. And you know, this fits the Israelites. It also talks about how chiefs were appointed and governors, and their offices were passed down to their sons. These are the Levitical priests. These are the Israelites, clearly. Above my head, you clearly see that it says that there was a plague of locusts for 5 years, so great that there was nothing green left. And there was also a famine that ensued as a result of it. And many of them fell dead. That's the Israelites. Here is more proof that I actually presented in the other videos. It says that the women of the Yucatan were generally of better build than the Spanish women. They had bigger butts. They were large booties. They were negresses. You see the arrow pointing to it where it says negresses. It says they were dark skinned. It has nothing to do with Africa. We are in the Yucatan right now. We're talking about the Yucatan, not Africa. Negresses. That's us. So now that I've set all of this up for you, you will clearly see how the slave trade was told in reverse. The people were taken from over here in the Americas, and then they were sent up through Europe and into Africa. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I want to show you something else first about Noah. So let's talk about gopher wood. That's what Noah used to construct the ark. The only place that gopher wood is found is in the United States, Florida, to be exact. Not Africa, not the fake Middle East. America.
Noah built the ark out of gopher wood, which God selected himself for him to build it on. This is the only place on this earth where it has ever grown. Noah built the ark out of wood not very far from where you and I are sitting here at Torrey State Park. It was loaded, and then it floated 5 months and landed on Mount Ayr, where we know definitely that it's now embedded in the ice.
You will now be hearing from Jack Forbes, an advocate for the indigenous people.
Columbus chose to finance the conquest of the West Indies by selling Native American slaves. And he characterized it as his granjeria, or granary. In other words, it was the granary that was going to pay for the conquest, that is, Native American bodies. And Columbus himself sent at least 3,000 and possibly as many as 6,000 or more Native American slaves to Europe. This begins as early as 1493. On his return voyage, he takes about 24 Native Americans to Portugal and Spain. In the subsequent voyages, many, many more are sent, men and women.
The ship pictured here is an exact replica of the ship that Christopher Columbus used in his first voyage across the North Atlantic in 1492 from various locations throughout the Caribbean. The ship's original name was La Galega, then changed to La Santa Maria de la Inmaculada Concepcion. In English, it was the Holy Mary of the Immaculate Conception. It's abundantly clear that the Roman Catholic Church had everything to do with the enslavement of the Israelites, the indigenous people of the Americas, more specifically the Caribbean, along with Britain. The red markings on the first 2 voyages indicate the islands that Christopher, sex trafficker, slave trader Columbus went to pick up the tribe of Judah. Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, St. Croix, Guadeloupe, Dominica, just to name a few. And he went to Spain from there. On the 3rd and 4th voyages, in addition to the islands I already named, they were picked up also from South America, Central America, Trinidad, Nevis, Martinique. And from there, they went to Spain and they were dispersed throughout Europe. Please pay close attention, because this is how the so-called Negroes left from the Americas went into Europe and down into Africa, and the area that they call Negro Land.
Now, he intends to sell them by the thousands, not only in Spain, but he mentions the Azores, the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands off, the west coast of Africa, as well as in Portugal and Spain and elsewhere. Virtually all areas of the Americas and all of the islands, virtually, including up to Greenland, for the most part, were occupied by different native people. So the entire continent and virtually all of the islands were occupied. Southern Greenland was a possible exception. When the Norse Vikings reached southern Greenland in the about 900, say, give or take, they found the remains of human beings there, but they didn't actually meet people in southern Greenland for a while. But almost everywhere else, there were native people occupying fully the whole space. Okay, now.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
The slave trade did not happen the way those who gave us their version of history told us it did, that people were kidnapped and taken from Africa and brought over here to the Americas and throughout the 4 corners of the earth. Why? Because there are whirlpools, there's strong undercurrents that are under the water that will pull you in, that go in a circular pattern, and they'll pull you under. This is why in one of the other videos that I did, the voyages that they attempted from South Africa were unsuccessful. They did not even have engines for their boats back then. They didn't come around until 1802, but the slave trade was said to have occurred from 1400s all the way to the almost 1900. Okay, so that didn't happen. They had to rely upon winds to push their sails. So come on now. The wind is not even steady like that for it to push you all the way to another continent. So Jack Forbes clearly told you that they were brought from the Americas and they were sent up to Europe and also into Africa, the Mediterranean, in certain places such as that. And Nwabani Ogogo is given their account of what they know about the slave trade in the Nigeria area. And then the ones in Africa, they were sold through the ports of Calabar and Bani in the south of what is known as Nigeria. People from ethnic groups along the coast, such as the Efik and the Ijal, usually acted as stevedores for the white merchants and as middlemen for Igbo traders. They call the people that they took to Africa from the Americas Africans in order to confuse you.
Because you've got to understand, the regal class of the house came into the land of the black Africans.
I want you to take note of the fact that he clearly separated the so-called Negroes from the Africans because we're two completely different people. And there are a lot of Africans that are fighting us African Americans because we're claiming our true indigenous identity because they don't understand not all so-called black people are the same people. We're different people with clearly different identities. You have to keep in mind, especially if you're a Bible believer, if you take a look at Psalm chapter 83, it clearly states that the Hamites who come from Noah's youngest son Ham, they had a part in ruining us as a people, ruining our identity, changing our identity. They helped the other nations do this to us.
And the black Africans resented the regal class of the house of Judah in their land because they had laws, they had customs, they had civility. And they were a regal class of Negro that came down into Africa. And later on, it was the Ashkenazi, the Islamic slave traders as well, that then worked together with the indigenous black Africans to enslave the regal house of Judah. This is what we've got to understand, but you've got to go back before the 16th century to understand the roots of it. Because it was really a system that was very, very well crafted. There was Islamic masters and there were white Ashkenazi Khazar ship owners. There were the buyers and the sellers. And they're not going to fill you in on all of this, but really you've got a 4-tier system. Number one, you have the Negro nomads that were exiled from the kingdom of Judah. Number two, you had indigenous black African hunters that resented the regal Negro nomads that had come into their territory with their own customs, with their own laws that were different and would not assimilate into their tribal culture. They were their own tribe. They were the regal house of Judah.
If you are following along closely to what this man is saying, he has made it abundantly clear that the so-called Negroes prior to slavery, colonization, and all that, they actually freely went to the land of Ham, the land of the Africans. And the Africans actually resented them from there. And they gave them up to the trappers to let them know, hey, look, yeah, these people, they're not us, they're here. So keep in mind, it was very clear and evident that we were totally, completely different people than the true Africans, the real Africans. Prior to all the mixing with the Anglo-Saxons, the Africans were very, very, very dark people. And those of us who are called Negroes, those of us who are indigenous to America, we're of a lighter hue. And this is outlined in so many books prior to the mixing, keep in mind. So there was a marked difference between us and the Africans during that time.
Number three, you had Islamic trappers that worked with the indigenous black Africans to trap the regal Negro house of Judah. And then you had them sell them to the Ashkenazi ship merchants, along with many Portuguese and British Ashkenazis.
I have made countless videos showing you solid evidence and proof that ancient Egypt is right here in the Americas, the United States of America to be exact. I showed you videos of how artifacts and hieroglyphics and ancient cities and tombs were found in the Grand Canyon. I also flipped a map for you in my 2-part video of shocking truths. Take a look at those. So now I want you to take a listen to Deuteronomy 28:68 one more time, keeping in mind that ancient Egypt is over here in America, and they changed it to Egypt over there in Africa.
Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. And Yahweh shall bring you into Mitzrayim, Egypt again, with ships. And the way of which I said to you, you shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold to your enemies for slaves and female slaves, and no man shall buy you. And that is what happened to the regal class of the House of Judah.
House of Judah, wake up! Those of you who are in Africa, who think that you're Africans, you're calling yourself Africans. That title belongs to the Hamites, those who are from the line of Ham, from Noah's son. You're from the line of Shem. Rise up, wake up. It's time for you to take your place. I know for certain that the Lemba tribe is over there in South Africa. You all went from West Africa all the way down to South Africa. There are a lot of you over there who are really, truly Israelites. You are the same people as we are over here in America. Wake up, Judah, wake up. Give your colonizers back their gods of Islam and Christianity. That is not your God. You're worshiping an idol. And return to your true God, the God of Israel. If you feel compelled enough to give for the hard work, research, the time in putting these videos together in order to give you all the truth, then feel free to donate at these links below. Thank you.